March, the best time of year for any Syracuse basketball fan. Come on, let's take a walk. In just her second year in charge, head coach Felicia Legette-Jack took the Orange back to the big dance. They haven't been since 2021. Their first game, no cakewalk. Arizona has been to March Madness every season for the past 5 seasons, and they've won their first game 100% of the time, until today. In a 74-69 win, Syracuse got the job done off the back of fourth quarter heroics by Della Fair. Philip Galati, Hudson Ridley, and AJ Myers here to break it all down for you live on Orange Press Pass, and it starts right now. All right, that was fun. Welcome to Orange Press Pass. Philip Galati, Hudson Ridley, AJ Myers here to break down Syracuse's 74-69 win in the first round of March Madness. A really close game. Boys, want to get your first thoughts. Hudson, we'll start with you. Syracuse getting the job done in nail-biting style.
Well, Phil, this team played their game. I mean, honestly, when you look at Syracuse women's basketball this season, it has been a slow start and a hot finish. Sometimes a hot start and a slow finish, but they get hot and cool throughout games, and that's what they did today. That's why they won this game, is because in that fourth quarter, they exploded, and we'll touch on that more later, AJ.
For me, this was Della Fair's moment. Big players step up on big occasions, and Fair did just that. Throughout the entire game, she was really SU's only source of offense. She had 32 points. She was really efficient from the free throw line. And she had that, I almost feel like, star player moment. Gets hurt, looks like she's out for the game, comes back in, hits 2 clutch shots near the end of the game, including a deep 3. It was Fair's moment, and she's the reason why SU won this game.
Well, the fourth quarter is really going to be the talking point of this one, but there were 3 other quarters in this game that we want to talk about. Let's roll the tape, the highlights from Syracuse and Arizona, a hotly contested battle down in the Nutmeg State. Arizona going for its 5th consecutive round 1 win. Syracuse looking for its first tournament win since 2021, and it was the Wildcats with the hot start inside the paint. Brea Cunningham good off the glass, and Hudson in the paint was where Arizona dominated in the first quarter.
Exactly, in terms of the points end, but one of the reasons this game swung all the way back around, Syracuse dominated on the glass, Phil. We'll touch on that later.
Syracuse tried to get within touching distance for most of this game. It helped that Sophie Burrows was making a couple 3-pointers, cuts the lead to 2, but after 10 minutes, it was 21-15 in favor of Arizona. Skylar Jones again doing the work down low. So in the second quarter, the Wildcats managed to build their lead. Syracuse looked a little bit lost, AJ.
Yeah, Syracuse did, and this is where many SU fans, I'm sure, thought, is this a repeat of the ACC tournament game against Florida State? Everything seemed to be going UConn's way. However, though, SU got back in this game thanks to defense, although it just took a while, but really, that's been SU this whole season. It just takes a while for them to get into the game. Once they get into the game and players get rolling, good things happen.
And good things happen when Della Fair is touching the basketball. Less than a minute to go, gets that one good going coast to coast, and then drives herself. Was a little bit hesitant at first, a slow start for the Rochester native. Arizona going into the locker room up by 5. Fast forward to the third quarter, Syracuse cuts the lead to 1. Georgia Woolley, the Australian, good from deep, 39-38, but then just as Syracuse tried to get close, it was more good defense from Arizona. No good on that one. Hughes caught on the back foot. Another Skylar Jones layup extending the lead for the Wildcats. Good Syracuse defense was the key to getting back into this game, and with almost 10 minutes to go, Della Fair doing what she does best. Didn't even know about that one. Makes the bucket. Syracuse gets the ball right back. Kennedy Perkins looking for help. She gives it number 1 to number 2. Della Fair with 5 seconds to go, staring down her defender just like a lioness, waiting to pounce. The Euro step hits the floor hard. And this was the worrying sign for Syracuse fans, a collective gasp across Orange Nation, as Della Fair slow to get up. She would start the fourth quarter in the locker room. So in her absence, Syracuse takes its first lead of the game. Kennedy Perkins with the made jumper, 8:44 to go. And just like that, Della Fair is back on the basketball court. And there was only so much Arizona could do. Della Fair going unconscious from behind the arc. She had 13 points in the final frame. Just look at that. Ready to pounce, looking for her lane, shrugs off the defender. You know where it's going to end up. And Syracuse holds on 74-69 in the final. An exhilarating win for Coach Felicia Legette-Jack and her crew. When you look at the final score, Hudson, what sticks out to you?
I mean, you see that 32 next to Deasia Fair's name? What else is going to stick out to me? This is what she's done all season long. This is her last chance to prove herself in her final March Madness before she rides off into the sunset on one of the greatest careers in women's college basketball history. And she just proved it yet again why she does have that career. 32 points tonight. She's already top 5 in all-time leading scoring. I mean, 6 steals to go along with that. What a performance.
Yeah, the 6 steals, I don't think many people think of her as a defensive presence, but tonight she really was. She also scored SU's last 13 points of the game. That is crazy. I think that just shows how important of a player she is, and without her, this team would not have won this game.
Well, this team did win this game, and we had someone in the Nutmeg State to talk all about it. Andrew Della, Piana, welcoming our live reporter into the show. And as we talked about, that second half, the fourth quarter in particular, was really where Syracuse pulled away. But Andrew, I want to ask you about what you heard from Coach Felicia Leggett-Jack at halftime. What was that halftime team talk that really spurred this team into a come-from-behind victory?
Well, Phil, it's a lot of words that I can't say on air, so I'll keep it on the lighter side. But FLJ is someone, of course, who is very adamant on the sideline, likes to wear her heart on her sleeve, and she really got after her players during that first media timeout where Syracuse is down 15-8, calling out Alyssa Latham as she works her way back to the huddle and saying, guys, we got to wake up. This is the NCAA tournament we're on right now, a very beatable Arizona team, and they just didn't come to play in that first half. But as FLJ has said all season long, it's a team that goes in the locker room, has conversations with each other, starts to write what they need to see on the whiteboard, and then they execute in the second half. It was a perfect example of that. Everything looked a lot better, especially the zone defense, where everyone locked in a little bit more, and FLJ is just that motivator that Syracuse needed to get over the hump today to beat Arizona.
This was one of the more odd rebounding games, Andrew. Syracuse, 20 defensive rebounds, 17 offensive rebounds. What was working so well for SU on the offensive glass today?
Well, you hit the nail right on the head there, Hudson. 17 offensive boards, only 20 in terms of defensively, but it's a matchup that worked really well for Syracuse, right? SU is one of the top 5 teams in the country when it comes to grabbing offensive boards. Arizona, bottom 25 in the nation when it comes to grabbing defensive boards. So a big component in that second half was Syracuse grabbing offensive boards, second chance possession. And again, that's something that FLJ said really flew under the radar in this game, because if Syracuse doesn't grab as many offensive boards, I don't see him coming back in this game. So a huge turning point. She gave a lot of credit to Alyssa Latham, Kyra Wood, and Isabel Verajao on that end for keeping possessions alive, and of course for Deasia Fair to go nuts as she did.
Andrew, AJ here. Of course, that Deasia Fair injury was really a heart-stop moment for SU fans. Did FLJ say anything after the game about how anything changed with her group going into that fourth quarter where they thought maybe they wouldn't have their best player?
Well, she had to motivate them tremendously, right? Kennedy Perkins had to come off the bench and play a huge role. But again, AJ, to your point, Deasia Fair goes down at the end of the third quarter, and FLJ comes off the bench, brings her a towel to hide her crying her eyes, and she said, D, you can't cry. There's so many cameras around. So I thought that was a pretty funny moment she revealed in the press conference. But someone else needed to step up, that being Kennedy Perkins. Also talked about the press conference needing to step up when Deasia Fair hit the deck there. But a huge turning point in the game, right? I'm looking down media row and saying, is Deasia Fair going to be able to come back in this game and make an impact? Luckily, with about 7 minutes left in the fourth quarter, she comes out of the locker room to a standing ovation of Syracuse fans that made the trip up from Central New York. And the fact that she scored 13 of her 32 points in the fourth quarter just shows you the toughness that number 2 wears on her chest, and using that Rochester native strong that she's been working with all season long.
Andrew Della, Piana, live in Connecticut. Thanks so much for joining the show. Excellent insight. As always, we're going to say goodbye to you for now, but make sure you keep it locked on @CitrusTV Sports on your social media platform of choice to see more coverage from him after the game. All right, we're going to step aside for a break here on Orange Press Pass. A lot more to talk about, so make sure you stick with us on the other side. See you soon. Welcome back to Orange Press Pass. Philip Galati, joined by Hudson, Ridley, AJ Myers, breaking down more of that 74-69 win in March Madness for the Qs. And it's always madness when we're watching Deasia Fair play basketball. It feels like she's the talking point for every Syracuse game, but she's also one of the highest scoring college basketball players of all time. So Hudson, for you, what was the key from her performance today that really propelled Syracuse to a victory?
Well, it was something she started to do more down the stretch, which honestly, we haven't seen her do in the last couple of weeks. It's creating her own space. Sometimes when this team struggles, it's when Deasia Fair is getting double teamed or face guarded, and they don't really have a secondary primary ball handler that can really do a lot of the damage. So her creating her own space on step backs, like you see right there, and other ways of creating space off of screens, that helped tremendously to get her open looks and score those last 13 points of this game.
Yeah, I think there was times this year where people thought Deasia Fair was taking too many shots or she was doing too much, jacking up too many threes. Today, I just thought she had a complete game where she did everything right. She went 6 of 7 from the foul line, especially down late stretch in the game in the fourth quarter. She needed to knock down those free throws. And then the last time she had 30 points, this kind of surprised me, was January. So that's kind of a drought for her. You know, given how good of a player she is. She hasn't gotten over 30 points since January. So I thought that was surprising when I saw that. For her to get 32 points, she just did everything right for me today. And it was a kind of Deasia Fair performance where if she didn't have this type of performance, I've already said it, I don't think Syracuse would have won.
No, not at all.
And it's crazy to think about how at the end of the third quarter, right, she took that hard fall. Syracuse fans didn't know if she was going to come back, but Andrew Della Piana talked about it. That Rochester grit is just unmatched. Hudson, you touched on secondary players, which is a perfect segue into what we're going to talk about next, because behind Deasia Fair, right, there are 4 other women wearing Syracuse jerseys, so we want to talk about some of them. AJ, someone else for you on Syracuse that really stepped up today?
For me, it was Alyssa Latham. I understand that first half, really no one for Syracuse did too much outside of Deasia Fair, but I thought Alyssa Latham, she got 10 points, 5 rebounds. Not a crazy stat line, but I thought she made a key impact, especially that fourth quarter. She was the only presence Syracuse had in the paint all day, and she's only a freshman, too. I think people forget about that. This is a role I don't think many people thought she would have. Verajao, unfortunately, hasn't been healthy enough to start, so Latham has stepped up the entire regular season, and now she's doing it in the postseason. Thought she had a really strong performance in a clutch situation for a young player.
You talk about a spot where you don't expect somebody to step up. Kennedy Perkins, 8 points may not seem like a lot, but that's her season high this year. She's brought in a lot on the defensive end and to be a bit of a distributor. She went 4 for 4 today, including going 3 for 3 in that fourth quarter. We talk about Deasia propelling her team to win. Kennedy Perkins did just that as well. She's crafty, and that's not something we saw a lot this season. We expect players to step up in big-time moments when they do it consistently all season. Now, you see someone who, on the biggest stage of the season so far, makes her first real impact on the offensive end without those extra points that you wouldn't even factor in before the game because it's Kennedy Perkins and you see her stat line. Without those extra points now being factored into that game, that's a huge momentum swing for Syracuse.
And I guess you could say better late than never, really, for these role players to step up. If they stepped up even sooner in the game, maybe it wouldn't have been as close, but they stepped up in that fourth quarter when they thought Deasia Fair wasn't going to come back.
But that's the beauty of March Madness, right? You get players who maybe haven't made a name for themselves in the regular season, teams that have flown under the national radar, and then come March, it's whatever. I mean, every game is a new opportunity for someone or some school to make a name for themselves. So let's talk a little bit more about the fourth quarter in this game. All season long, Syracuse has played good teams down to the wire. They've been able to pull it out, play a good 40 strong, complete minutes. But today, those last 10 minutes really stuck out. Hudson, curious to get your take on what was the key change in that final frame.
Well, it was a little bit of desperation, I think, AJ, going into that final frame. They play from behind a lot this season. That's something that they're completely accustomed to doing, but they play it with Deasia Fair. Now, all of a sudden, seconds before that quarter starts, Deasia Fair goes down. I know we were frantically worrying about her, like, oh no, this could be really bad. It ended up being completely fine because of the fact other players stepped up. Like we mentioned, Kennedy Perkins. They scored 23 in that final quarter, and Deasia Fair, like you said, had the final 13. That was a big swing for Syracuse and a team playing behind the entire game.
Yeah, for me, what it was on the defensive end. Syracuse had forced 21 turnovers, got 26 points from those turnovers. They also got 12 steals. That defense was key, especially late in the game. But while that was important, the most important factor in why Syracuse came back in this game, it's nothing to do with the highlights. Yes, you know, the baskets are good. That's how you win the game. It's their head coach. Felicia Leggett-Jack has a way of inspiring this group of players to overcome any obstacle, whether it's points, whether it's injuries, and she's done it at times this whole year, and she did it again today in what was the biggest game of the season so far.
It's always fun to watch her coach, but as for our Orange Press Pass player of the game, no surprise. Everyone's favorite Rochester baller, Deasia Fair. With a 32-piece and 13 points alone in that fourth quarter, there was no stopping her today. Despite ending that third quarter with a hard fall and missing the first few minutes of the final frame, she came back and not only changed her game, but as she so often does, uplifted her teammates around her. She stares down her defender one-on-one. There is absolutely nothing stopping her getting to the basket. So with that, we've got more NCAA madness to talk about, and we're going to talk about it. We put the bracket together. We're talking north, south, east, west, Albany, Portland, everything in between. When we come back, previewing the women's bracket. We'll see you soon.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Orange Press Pass, stretching our legs. We're here at the wall. Philip, Galati, Hudson, Ridley, AJ Myers. We're talking about the bracket. Okay, maybe not that much stretching. We're not going to go play.
I almost ripped my suit.
But we're talking about the bracket. Our producers and everybody behind the scenes making this broadcast possible worked very hard to bring you some very interesting content as we look at the rest of the country. We start with Albany 1, and the teams, here they are. Oklahoma, FGCU playing today. Oklahoma won that one. Indiana, the 4 seed, getting a comfortable win over Fairfield. But as we look at the rest of the bracket, one game to keep your eye on, Battle of the Carolinas, #1 overall seed and most people's favorite to win it all, South Carolina, coming up against a decent UNC team that got the job done against Michigan State. Hudson, we'll start with you. What are you looking at in this 1-8 seed matchup?
Well, I mean, South Carolina, for most parts of the season, has looked completely unbeatable. I mean, they're 33-0 currently. That's a massive difference. And they just crushed Presbyterian, AJ, which, small school. But they still crushed Presbyterian. So when you look at that kind of performance they've put together this year, it's big time. But also, they've looked a little shaky in recent weeks, especially in the SEC tournament. And North Carolina is a team that crushed Syracuse earlier in the year. They've got some sneaky pieces. I'm not saying an upset here, but it's going to be a really close game.
You're talking a lot about South Carolina, Hudson. Rightfully so. They're a really good team. But UNC has a lot of experience playing South Carolina. They played them in the 2022 tournament. It was a close game. And this season, they've also played them close as well. Biggest key for UNC, though, is their point guard play. Deja Kelly, she has been in and out of the lineup. That role for UNC has kind of been up in the air. They don't really know who that floor general is, but she's played really well, probably her best basketball towards the end of the season. She's going to be a big factor against a really good South Carolina team.
So as we look at the next part of the bracket, next up is Portland 4. A lot of really good teams to talk about in this side of the country as well. We look at the games from today. Utah, South Dakota State going to be playing. So too Gonzaga and UC Irvine, Texas and Alabama up there as well. #1 seed Texas looking good. Alabama got the win over Florida State, another good team. But as we look at this part of the bracket, there's something that you don't see, and that's Iowa State and Stanford. Those two teams have looked really good this year. There's Stanford, there's Iowa State. Again, looking at today, NC State got the win over Chattanooga, Tennessee over Green Bay. When you look at Iowa State and Stanford, Stanford is 13-2 when making 7 threes a game. 7 threes is their average this year. So shooting from deep, not too bad. AJ, let's start with you. Looking at that 7-2 matchup, what sticks out to you?
Another really good game. You talk about the threes. I'm going to talk about the rebounding. Both of these teams are really good rebounding teams, and I think it's going to be key who wins the battle in the paint for this one because, yes, both teams can put up the threes, but who's going to get those rebounds?
Well, exactly. This is one of the best paint battles we've maybe seen in the last couple of years. You think back to those Mississippi State versus UConn days where they're just grinding it out in the paint. We have another one of these here. Cameron Brink, a multi-time All-American Naismith Award watch list player, going against Audi Crooks, who's just a freshman. She had 40 last game in a comeback win over Maryland. That's something you don't see much. The Iowa State Police Department put out a thing that said, some crooks you just can't stop, and Audi Crooks is one of those that's going to be incredibly hard to stop. I think this season we've seen some great paint play, but I just don't see this being a bad game. This is fantastic, though.
Fantastic is a little bit of an understatement as we look at more teams in the bracket. Fantastic, of course, describing who else but Caitlin Clark, Iowa, looking strong in this one, absolutely dominating Holy Cross. Unfortunate as a Massachusetts native to see the Lady Crusaders out early, but something you don't see on this bracket is LSU. Kim Mulkey's squad hasn't looked as strong as they have in other seasons, and they're coming up against Middle Tennessee State, a team that erased an 18-point deficit against Louisville, one of the best teams in the ACC. So Hudson, looking at that matchup for LSU and Middle Tennessee State, what do you got to talk about?
No one loves Middle Tennessee State more than me. No one loves the Lady. No one loves the Lady Raiders more than I do. You didn't even know they were the Lady Raiders, and I do. I had them over Louisville in the first round because I believe in this team. They have multiple players that shoot close to that 40% three-point mark, and LSU is a team that's getting a little bit, I don't know, overconfident at this point. Angel Reese is good, and Haley Van Lith is good, but they both had kind of down seasons, and they're very, very vulnerable to the three ball. Kim Mulkey has also been causing a little bit of concern around the program. I don't think they're ready to face Middle Tennessee State. Call me crazy, but in my bracket, I have this game going Middle Tennessee State to the Sweet 16.
Hudson, call me crazy. I'm going to agree with you. Middle Tennessee is a good team. LSU's got a lot of drama right now with their head coach in this Washington Post article. Where's their focus going to be? And also, interesting nugget with Middle Tennessee, they are 28-0 this season when they score more than 60 points. LSU's defense is going to have to be locked in because if Middle Tennessee, if they're scoring, if they're having a good offensive day, they're winning. I got the upset here as well.
Who would have thought? 28, no, that's crazy. Creighton, UNLV playing today, so too UCLA, California Baptist, 2-15 seed. Probably not going to talk a lot about that one, but we are going to talk about Syracuse's reach into the bracket. Of course, getting the win today over Arizona. Arizona got the win over Auburn. UConn is next up. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but something else to note in this part of the bracket, no Liz Kitley for Virginia Tech, one of the best players in the ACC. She's out for this tournament. Looking at the rest of this bracket, is there another team besides UConn to look out for?
I mean, honestly, at this point, no. I think with Liz Kitley going down, I mean, in this part of the bracket, though, you can't ignore, obviously, UCLA. We're talking close part of the bracket, though. I just think Virginia Tech, without Liz Kitley, they need Georgia Amore to step up. She will, but UConn is just too powerful, and they're a little more healthy. I'm not going to say they're healthy, but they're a little more healthy. So.
Interesting matchup for me is that 7-10 game, Creighton and UNLV. I think both those teams are strong teams. 7-10, we always see those kind of seeded teams make a late run. Could see that again.
Well, what we are going to see is Syracuse and UConn in just a little bit. We got to talk about it. You want to know about it, but we are going to step aside for one last break before that. We come back. We're talking Huskies. We're talking Orange. The old Big East rivalry renewed in the Big Dance. Stick with us.
Welcome to my house. Lately, not my happy place. Everybody's pretty tired of each other. The parents were not themselves. My little brothers were morphing into small creatures. The walls were closing in. Clearly, a case of too much family, too close, 24/7. And there's a lot of that going around right now. If this sounds like your house, try going someplace new. YourLifeYourVoice.org. You'll find lots of ideas to help you handle the family stresses of being confined to close quarters. YourLifeYourVoice.org. It might not get you out of the house, but it could help you find a little more breathing room.
One more time here in Orange Press Pass from the Waverly Avenue Studios. Phil Galati, Hudson Ridley, AJ Myers. Almost time to get out of here, but not before we talk about Syracuse's next opponent, and that's UConn, one of the most feared names in women's college basketball, coming off a big win against Jackson State in the first round of the NCAA tournament. Looking at the full score of that game in just a second here, UConn, a team to be feared, and against that Jackson State team, Hudson, they dominated.
I mean, they completely did. They almost shot 50-40-90, which is 50% from the floor, 40% from three. Excuse me, yeah, 40% from three, and 90% from the line. They completed the 50 and the 90. They were just a couple percentage points below the 40. That is the sign of pure domination, guys. I mean, when you look at a team that has those kind of shooting splits, that is virtually unbeatable. You think of some Celtics teams and Bucks teams in the last few years. Those are the things that they look for in guys that shoot 50-40-90. This whole team just shot 50-40-90.
Yeah, and you want to talk about stat lines, look at Paige Becker's line. 28 points, 11 rebounds, 7 assists. I mean, that is a really good stat line. If you're looking at a Syracuse perspective, who's going to stop her from doing something similar? That's definitely a worrying sign. She's such a good player for this team. She's really the heart and soul, but they also have so many other good role players, as you mentioned. That's why they're shooting at such a high percentage and playing good defense.
Georgia Woolley is going to have her hands full. That's who
absolutely.
You got to imagine will be on Paige Becker's because of similar play style and arm length. But Georgia Woolley is not that good of a defender. Paige Becker's might get everything she wants. And then also, who's going to guard Aaliyah Edwards? A fantastic day for her in the paint with 20 points and 10 rebounds. This team is looking pretty unbeatable, and they're getting hot at the right time as they just crush Jackson State today.
And an early sign of, an issue for this when they play Syracuse is paint problems. Alyssa Latham, I praised her earlier in the show, but I mean, she's going to have her hands full in the paint. I don't really think the 5 is her role, and she's kind of being forced to play that role at times this year. That's going to be an issue. This UConn team is really, really good. SU, this is definitely going to be their toughest test of the year.
And they have depth as well. That's something you have to look at UConn.
Something Syracuse doesn't have.
Syracuse doesn't have depth. Ashlyn Shade today, a freshman, 26 points out of Ashlyn Shade, just one behind Paige Becker's. That's something that you don't see a lot of freshmen do. We mentioned Audi Crooks earlier in the show, who had 40. But honestly, you don't see that out of a lot of freshmen. She's one of the top-ranked freshmen in the country after being a highly ranked recruit. That's exactly what UConn does, and they've transformed her into a phenomenal player to be reckoned with.
So plenty of praise for the Huskies, but it has to be noted, UConn comes into this tournament as a 3 seed. They've only been a 3 seed 3 times in their history, 1991, and then most recently, 2005. So I look at that and I go, UConn, usually a 1 seed, they're down at the 3 seed, but AJ, you can't count this team out.
Absolutely not, and it's interesting enough that UConn and Syracuse have a lot of history in the NCC tournament. They played each other in 2021. UConn blew out Syracuse, and they also met in the national championship in 2016, the last time the Huskies won a title. That was a really good Huskies team, blew out the Orange. What the key is in the last matchup, I know none of the players are on Syracuse right now, is only 2 players scored in double figures. Hudson, guess what? Tonight, only 2 Syracuse players scored in double figures. More players need to step up for SU.
Exactly, especially because we mentioned the health of UConn. They're a little bit more healthy than last year, but they're still missing one of the top players in the country, and Ozzie Fudd, who's been out this entire season. So I think UConn's a little bit weaker than they have been in most years, but they're still a force to be reckoned with.
Force to be reckoned with, but maybe hope for Syracuse fans. Before we get out of here, got to get your final thoughts. Hudson, we'll start with you. What does Syracuse need to do to move on in the big dance?
Phil, it was fun while it lasted. This team is not beating. They have too many structural issues. I love this. I love this story. I love our family against your team. I love Felicia Leketchak. I love Deasia Fair. It pains me to say this. This team is done. They are, and I really wish they could continue to go further, but there are too many structural issues. I don't see this team making it past a really sound UConn team.
It's going to be a tough test, and without a doubt, and I've hinted at it this entire show really, is someone other than Deasia Fair. Of course, Deasia Fair probably needs to score 30, maybe 40 points, but somebody else needs to have a really good game, at least get 20 points if Syracuse wants any chance at winning.
AJ Myers, Hudson Ridley, Phil Galati saying thank you so much for joining us, and thank you again to everybody behind the scenes making this broadcast possible. An ambitious one, a fun one, boys. It's been great. Syracuse gets the dub, 74-69. See you next time.